We are an organization that is dedicated to creating conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. And we're thrilled to serve as a partner on this very important film that asks that question, can tomorrow's generation find common ground? I'm going to take a minute to introduce our panel, and then I will introduce you to my colleague, Cynthia, who will be moderating today. So on the end here, we have Stephanie Hicks-Thompson, Director of Foundation, Campus Engagement, and Programming at the Cleveland Foundation. We have our filmmaker, Red Gilliam, the Director of Common Grounds. Next, we have Tom Sutton, Director of the Community Research Institute and Professor of Political Science at Baldwin-Wallace University. And finally, we have Rebecca Morgan, President of Fulcrum Consulting Works and a member of Braver Angels and a member of the City Club. And finally, I'll turn it over to our moderator for this conversation, my wonderful colleague, the Director of Programming at the City Club, Cynthia Connolly.
All right, good afternoon. What a gorgeous day. And I feel like we owe the Greater Cleveland an apology, Alyssa. We've had 2 forums for the City Club during the Guardians games, so I'm grateful. We had one yesterday, which was a really great conversation, and then one today. I'm so grateful to everyone joining here. I know some of you are probably checking the score right now on your phones. Feel free to do so. But what a joy to be here to talk about this incredible film. Grateful to have the filmmaker here with us, which is such a treat. When I first watched this film, I really started to think about all the ways that I had to find common ground. In particular, for those of you who aren't familiar with me, I did a lot of work with the Cleveland baseball team name change. I'm part of the local Native American community, so that was a moment of trying to find common ground with not only this national entity or this MLB team, but also within my own community, because people are complicated, right? And so I think that's what we're going to talk about now, the humanity, the empathy behind people, and how we can come together on different things. And I really wanted to start with you, Ryan, about your experience making common ground. If you wanted to kind of talk about the inspiration behind that, the work that went into it. I'm also utterly fascinated that this was completely student-led. I feel like, maybe I should have been a little more ambitious in college, but if you wanted to start with kind of the inspiration.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. This was an educational experience for me personally, because I was telling some folks back in the back, I was born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon, so all the way in the Middle East. Also a very divided, the division is literally written into the law. Different members of parliament have to represent different religious political groups, which, as you can imagine, would get very complicated. So I came from there, and then UVA was really my kind of entry into the situation of American politics in a real felt, practical way. And so I was kind of motivated to do something about it. I'm a filmmaker. I love telling stories, and I kind of have a more like narrative film, like that's what I want to do. And so if you told me 2 years before that I'd be doing a political American politics documentary, I'd been like, why? But I've come a long way. It started as a school project with UVA Center for Politics. So some of you might be familiar. You might have heard the name Larry Sabato. He's like a big political pundit. He's on the news during elections all the time. And it was just a group, me and 4 other interns, and we were in the programming department of the center and doing a course during the week, and then we had to fill up 4 hours of internship hours. And there had been a couple controversial events that had happened back in the fall of that year, and so those sparked a conversation. We're like, let's do a 10-minute short, and then it grew into a 30-minute short, and here we are.
That's great. When you went into making this documentary, what were your thoughts on the outcome of it?
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect. And when we first started actually trying to reach out to different people to take part, like there were some people who just like slammed an email back to us saying, no, like I'm not going to compromise. And like, this is a backwards thing that you're trying to do, like stop. And so I was like, well, this bodes well, and at least it'll be an interesting documentary with a lot of action. But
so entering with skeptics already, right?
Yeah, but honestly, it turned out really well, and I think, I had this vision that I couldn't even tell you what it was, but what this ended up being was, I think, what I wanted to say, and the journey there was, figuring it out.
Yeah. Becky, I want to take some time to chat with you really quick about your work. Specifically with Braver Angels, and maybe for those in the audience that aren't familiar with that work, maybe just describe what Braver Angels does first.
Sure. Braver Angels is a volunteer membership organization that was created in, I think, December of 2016. There were 3 men whose names I can't remember, but you can look them up at braverangels.org, who brought together 11 Clinton supporters and 10 or 11 Trump supporters over a weekend to try to find out if we could stop this evolving divide and if we could get people to talk and listen. And since that time, the organization, the weekend was very successful from the standpoint that nobody's mind was changed. Again, that was not the purpose. But people found out that just because you're Muslim and conservative doesn't mean that you're a total idiot. So there was that kind of like, we have other things that we can discuss and find out. The organization has grown as a national organization now. They have a lot of different aspects. We put on workshops. I've taken a social media class twice, and trust me, we could all use some work there. I took 2 different ones. I don't want you to think I was remedial. But it's, we have a film, we all discuss a film, and one of the films that was there was 12 Angry Men, but another one of them was Rad's film, and that was just a few months ago. So it's, we have one-on-one exercises we can help you through. So it's all about just learning how to listen. It's not to convert, it's how do we hear, and there's some mechanisms for how to do that.
So are there any like really neat examples you want to bring forward about a training or a session that you went, maybe even with a school or something that maybe had an outcome you weren't expecting, or got to that listening aspect of it, not necessarily the mind-changing aspect?
I have participated. There is a Northeast Ohio Alliance, and we have a meeting coming up later this month that will be a Zoom meeting, and any of you who would like to check it out, go online, and you can certainly check it out and find out what we are. I have not participated in the schools, but I'm getting my undergraduate and first graduate school to try to get involved. There is a campus program to try to help to get college students to be able to use these mechanisms. For me, the biggest thing I've seen is what I wanted, which was the development of me. I always thought I'd listen to anybody except stupid people. And it's that except stupid people that I have to get over, because people aren't stupid. I mean, there are probably a few, but the vast majority just may think differently. And so the biggest change I've noticed is in how I listen and in how I respond. And believe me, I'm a work in progress. We all are, but I don't want to hate all these people that I used to love just because of an election. So that's the biggest thing that I've seen, and I can't speak to what's happened for everybody else, but a lot of the words that I hear from other people are, I'm learning how to listen.
Yeah, listening is very, very key in a lot of things, relationships, internally, at work, within our community, and specifically around politics and differences. For Stephanie, I'd love to take some time to chat with you really quick. For those of you who aren't familiar, she does a lot of the work with Common Ground, which is a series of events over at the Cleveland Foundation, where I think one of the ones I went to, I think was a dinner in the middle of the Ohio City farm.
Oh, that was a good one, yeah.
Yeah, that was incredible. And then I just got to learn so much about the refugee community. And, I felt like I was in the know and knew some, but like what a moment of learning for me and our neighbors. So maybe take a little bit to talk about what Common Ground is really quick.
Sure, yeah, you bet. And I'll try to be brief. But Common Ground is complicated. Basically what it is at its nature is a community conversation platform that's run by the Cleveland Foundation. We provide supports, trainings, community capacity building for community hosts to build Common Ground conversations. So each Common Ground conversation is different. When people talk about it, they almost always say, oh, I went to one that was just like what Cynthia did. There was actually one in 2021 directly across the street at Chagrin Arts, which was hosted with the Ohio Innocence Project, where they talked about a man who had been wrongly convicted and released from prison after being in prison for 25 years, and we had a conversation with the community about that topic. So each Common Ground is different. It's created by a passionate community member who wants to create a conversation around something that they're passionate about, either something about their neighborhood, about their hobbies, about their personal interests, about their political interests, about pretty much anything, and the foundation supports them in that. And each year since 2016, we've convened Common Ground. We've put together over 100 events and help the passionate Clevelanders and greater Clevelanders have those conversations that are really meaningful to them.
Yeah, what I like the most about Common Ground in looking back in my graduate school days with reading this one book, Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, was basically the premise is that American democracy and civil civic discourse is dying because people are not interacting with each other. Bowling leagues was like the litmus test of like how strong your democracy was in your community. And so just those day-to-day interactions with people, and I think if you wanted to talk a little about Common Ground and that kind of empathy and humanity aspect of it.
Yeah, I think it's where Common Ground fits into this conversation. We don't come at it directly. Common Ground is not about political conversations. It's about the individual host's desires and the thing that they want to have a conversation about. But it creates this opportunity for people who may not have connected otherwise to connect with each other, and I think that's the secret. You come at it sort of sideways by creating a conversation with someone who you've never met. Something we say a lot with Common Ground is sitting down with a group of strangers in this day and age is kind of a brave act, right? Like, you are community building if you sit down with somebody you don't know and say, okay, so tell me about yourself, what are you interested in? That is community building. You don't have to go do a community project, but we do still support those with Common Ground. But I think by building a connection with a stranger and finding something that you both share, whether it's an opinion or a hobby or a passion about your community, you build a connection that allows you to see them as a human instead of sort of this depersonalization that a lot of the conversations that I think happen in today's day and age bring onto others. So that's really the secret sauce of Common Ground, is trying to create those connections between individuals, sustain conversations, and hopefully create a relationship between them where they can later, push through maybe some of those differences that they have.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And I think that was one of the main reasons why we really wanted to make sure that Common Ground was brought into this conversation about Common Ground, because finding Common Ground isn't just about politics. Like, how do we convene as community, as people, as humans, around a whole bunch of issues? Because I think we've all had to see compromise or see eye to eye to other people with a whole bunch of things in our lives. I wanted to move over to Tom really quick, just because Tom, you have a really interesting job at Baldwin Wallace. So you do a lot of the surveying of Ohioans and other groups and entities, and so you kind of have your finger on the pulse of like what actually people think. And
at least the ones willing to respond.
The ones willing, yes. So we have a little caveat there. But some of these issues that we're hearing about, particularly in this documentary, in our own communities, in the news, they seem really controversial and polarized. Are they actually?
I'll be a typical political science professor or politician, yes and no. I think one of the big differences, and we all recognize this, but it's one thing to recognize it, it's another to really do something about it. We function on two levels today. One level is face-to-face. The other level is through the internet. And that's where a lot of this is coming from. So when we're on social media and we become anonymous, and some of us don't even use our names with our social media handles, etc., you saw the students in that film talking about what happened to them, conservative and liberal, when they put themselves out there with an opinion or worked for an organization like the Cavalier Daily, which was a student newspaper, the kind of responses they got from other students at one of the world's leading universities. I'm a little biased. I'm a 1982 grad, so you've got a 40-year span of UVA between here. So wahoo wah. Which we used to say that it was named for the wahoo, and we were called the wahoos because it was a fish that needed to drink to survive. I'll leave that one alone. So we just finished a survey of Ohioans, likely voters, mostly on issues of civil liberties. And that's going to be coming out next week. We hope it gets picked up. There's a lot of surveys, as you've seen, because it's election season. But what we found was a distinct difference between what people said in the survey and what politicians are doing in Ohio. So for instance, let's go right to one of the big critical social issues. Should we be teaching about race in our schools? So we asked very directly 2 questions. Should we be teaching about the history of racism? 75% of the people responded yes. Should we be teaching about the impact of the history of racism in our country? 75% said yes. Now, this was a survey that was very carefully stratified to make sure that we got all regions of the state. So this wasn't just urban voters in Cleveland and Cincinnati, et cetera. It was all across the board. I've got a lot of other data, but I have to tell you one that I got from the Pew Research Center, which is a gold standard for survey data. And it had to do with what Democrats and Republicans think of each other and how that's changed just in the last 6 years. So from 2016 to this summer, they asked the question, what percentage of you think the people of the other party are, well, they put it, unintelligent? And so for those who are, let me see, I gotta find my data here really quick because it's all handwritten and that's really bad. Basically, the Democrats thought Republicans in 2016, 33% of them said that Republicans are unintelligent. That's gone up to 52% today. Republicans, almost exactly the same. 32% said Democrats are unintelligent in 16, 51% said it today. And again, this is a national survey it's one of the most highly regarded, so I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, I want to make sure we open this up to the group here for questions, and I believe we have a microphone here in a minute, but I want to follow up to you as well. Like, is there any, when we talk about common ground and something that just seems like this is low-hanging fruit, you know, based on your surveying and based on the fact that, you know, 80 to 95% agree, but then we're seeing a lot of controversy and polarization around the topics, like, what's that low-hanging fruit on finding common ground?
Well, I think a lot of it is being willing to talk to each other, and as you saw there, the unwillingness of students to speak to each other about things political. I see the same thing at BW. So I am the advisor for the college Democrats and the college Republicans. And part of that is to ensure that they don't know where I'm coming from, and they still don't 22 years later. So we just had a session with the college Republicans Thursday night with Representative Tom Patton, who I would describe as a moderate Republican. They're going to be having a session with Senator Nick Antonio pretty soon with the college Democrats, and she is a very liberal Democrat. But our college Republicans did the exact same thing you heard in this movie, where they said, we feel like if we ever come out with our positions or we talk about politics, we're going to get squashed by super liberal students, by students who are GLBTQ, and I've heard a number of these, by professors. And so it's become almost like a refugee group. They also will not put out publicly that they're having an event. We basically spread the word through their own networks and then have an event. And I will talk with them about conservative Republican issues, and I'll do the same thing with Democrats on the other side. We try to bring them together as debaters, and they're more than willing to talk with each other about those things as part of these clubs. So it's not that they're not willing to talk to each other, it's the social judgment that's attached to people's political positions. And on college campuses, at least UVA and BW, they tend towards the liberal side. Pew says the same thing about this generation. So how do we make that happen? We've got to find these common spaces for these discussions, and face-to-face is where it needs to start.
And I want to stay with you just for 1 second here because I know I heard you're a UVA alum.
Indeed, yes.
Maybe touch on, is it different now versus when you were a student?
Oh, worlds different. Yeah, and I still get the UVA Alumni Magazine because they've been chasing after me for my $300 pledge that I made when I was a senior 40 years ago. They've spent more than $300 on mailings, I can guarantee you that. But at any rate, when I was there in 1978 to 1982, women hadn't even been admitted for 10 years at that point. Black students had started attending sometime in the 60s by 1, 2, or 3. The campus was largely segregated informally. There were 4 black fraternities, 2 black sororities, and over 30 sororities and fraternities that were white. Now, this wasn't official. This was unofficial. I lived my second year in an apartment with 3 other guys, 1 white, 2 black. We had a party one weekend that everybody's invited to on a Friday night. And only the white friends showed up on that night, and the next night, all of a sudden, all the black friends showed up. And we're looking at each other, and Andre Johnson from Virginia, one of our black roommates, said, "That's just the way things are around here." That was 1979. So they've come a long way, and I think you saw that no matter what people's perspectives. But a lot of that just never got talked about. It was just all under the surface.
Wow. I want to make sure that we make some space for questions. Does anyone have a question right now that I want to raise your hand? I know we don't have a microphone. I don't know if we just want to stand up and announce your question. Yep.
Yeah, so I had a team of 4 other students with me, and they actually, honestly, the story behind how this documentary was made was probably just as interesting, if not more interesting, than the actual documentary, because some of the students on the team were very, very diverse politically, and we were just kind of put together randomly at the start and had to figure it out. And so there were so many kind of almost arguments, heated conversations, times where I had to play kind of peacemaker between team members, but the benefit was that they, whenever it came to stuff like what questions are we going to ask, who are we going to select, they were all like very politically minded students who knew all the layout of the clubs and had specific individuals in mind. And we really did, we were keeping balance in mind, because it would be a lot of fun to have someone just who's crazy spout out their views and dominate the conversation. But that wasn't what we were going for. So that was kind of the guiding strategy.
If you could do it over again, would you get the same group of students, or would you try for a fresh batch?
Well, it might be fun to do another version where it's just like complete nutcases. But one idea,
like the ones on like Klepper and stuff.
Right, where they're just like, no. But I think one idea that's like at the back of my mind, who knows, is like it would be cool to bring these students back in like 30 years and see what happened. So. Chagrin, we'll do that. See you in 30 years. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
We have a question here in pink hat.
Yeah, and I guess, coming from the Middle East, wars are fought in perpetuity. There have been, honor, shame, the story of vengeance. We're never gonna forgive. We can't. And there are conversations that no amount of organizing will put a full stop to. But, the fact is, and I don't know what you would say, even the word human rights and how you base your human rights and on what basis, what is a human right, what isn't a human right. I mean, there's literally everything can be discussed and talked about. And but I think ultimately it's like there is a level, if you feel safe with someone chatting and exploring ideas, go for it. But if someone is stepping on your shoes and is combative, then that's, like she said, it's violence. So there's a personal decision and value judgment that you have to make when you go into a conversation with someone. But I think if we can enter these conversations with more generosity and curiosity about how, you could maybe turn the question and be like, okay, for me that sounds like a clear violation of just basic human rights. I think you care about human rights, right? Like, how would you define human rights? And kind of start talking about human rights. Maybe you might help them see something that they hadn't seen before when they were thinking about these issues.
One technique that Braver Angels uses a lot on what we call debates, but don't consider them high school debates. Well, they may be now. I haven't been to a high school debate in 50 years. But these are, the ones I've been part of have been in Zoom. And there may be 200 people on the Zoom. There will be I forget what their position is, but I'll call him a moderator. And there is a statement, and the statements are never simple, because what's the purpose if we all agree? So they're always going to be something that there are very diverse views on. So there is a statement, just like you had a prompt or a debate prompt. Everybody, the first person, you're either, I'll say yes or no on whatever the debate is, and they know who's who when you first sign up because you say where you are, so they can make sure that they're having a balanced conversation. And then if I'm the first speaker, I will state my position on that to the moderator. When I'm done, the moderator will say, okay, let's thank the speaker, which everybody kind of sort of does, and then they'll ask somebody from the other side to respond or to speak. They speak back to the moderator. So we do not allow person-to-person conversation or combat, but clearly we're all on the same Zoom call. So it's not like I know she isn't talking about me, but she's talking to somebody else, and it's not, Becky, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's, moderator, could you ask Becky to explain how she reached that conclusion? So that it is, and they really help us through the staying away from argumentative questions and comments. And the goal is not for us to agree. Our goal is not for a common definition of, in this example, human rights. It's not for me to convince you that my position is right and that yours is wrong. It's for us to better understand why somebody from the Middle East might have a different perception of what human rights are from somebody who grew up in some other place with some other vastly different experience. So we try to get less why, because we don't want to accuse people or put people on the spot, but we're trying to understand. So how did you come to that? And we may never agree on human rights, but we may agree that people from Kansas are cool. And sports people are cool because I love sports and I'm from Kansas. We're going to find some things that we can still be open to conversation. And we may never be able to talk about human rights in a healthy way, but we can begin to listen to each other. And again, that's half the battle. If we'll come into the conversation not seeking to correct or fix, but seeking to understand how people reach the conclusions they have at this point, then we can have a healthy conversation on just about any topic there is.
Stops those personal attacks too when you're going through a moderator as well.
Yeah, it's easy to feel attacked if you say to me, how can you not believe in human rights? How can you is a very personal comment. But if she says to Raed, ask Becky how she came to the conclusion that Jews in Lebanon shouldn't have equal rights, then we can talk about how I came to that conclusion, which would not be my conclusion, by the way, but we can talk about how
Hypotheticals here, hypotheticals.
about how I came to that conclusion. And you may never agree with me or support me, but at least there's some kind of logic or history or thinking behind it.
Or a deeper thing beneath that. That has nothing to do with the surface issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tom, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I want to suggest I have the same issue when it comes to things like rights, that somehow states are going to determine, well, in Indiana you have these rights, and in Ohio you have these rights, or you don't, in New York, et cetera, that the definition of rights is that they're universal. I mean, it's based on Enlightenment principles and the Declaration of Independence and everything else. However, you have to think about the dynamics that drive a lot of this. First of all, the dynamics of two of the most basic human reactions and things that we focus on, pride and fear. Then you layer onto that, the easiest way to get your vote is to appeal to you on the basis of pride and or fear. And because of the way our system has evolved, it's evolved into a system where those that are the best at appealing to those emotions on both sides win. And that's compounded by the effect of gerrymandering across the country, including here in Ohio, and we've all seen what's happened with that. And the gerrymanderers will say, well, we have the majority, we get to draw the lines however we want. It's all about majority rule. Rights are never determined on the basis of majorities. They're determined by the concept of protecting rights, the 64 Civil Rights Acts, the 65 Voting Rights Act, because numerically, blacks should never have gotten any rights at all. Native Americans should never have been made citizens because, oh, well, they're the minority. Who cares? The principle is what we care about. And I think that's one of the greatest concerns many of us have, because it is those foundational, fundamental principles that are getting eaten away, again, by both sides. The discussion about speech was fascinating. And a lot of us have lost that whole concept that if we speak on a level playing field, we shouldn't be afraid of hate speech, we should respond to it. When the KKK marched in public square in Cleveland 25 years ago, whenever that was, and they were given the protection to change in the police offices in the Justice Center into their robes, go out and come back, there were 20 or 30 of them. It spawned events that happened all over the region embracing diversity, including here in Chagrin Falls. I remember the Federated Church was part of it. It was an overwhelming display of the value of human rights and diversity sparked by racist supremacists. And it was like, boys, come back. You did more for diversity than anyone's done in 10 years. That's free speech.
Wow. Do we have another question in the audience? Yes.
Hi, I'm actually a student at Loyola University Chicago, and so being from Chicago, our campus is majority left-leaning. So I just wanted to ask you how you guys think we can start those conversations, maybe in places that are already majority a certain way, just from a certain, just being from a certain region.
I'd like to just jump in and say I encourage you to check out braverangels.org. They have a specific college campus program where they work with a faculty member who will take it on and help organize it and all that. And I mean, the chances are that every place, this room is not divided 50-50. I don't know what our mix is. There is no 50-50 divide anywhere. So you may be in a liberal campus or a conservative campus by definition, even if it's 51-49. But we have techniques, we help people discuss and understand, and it has been supported by, and I forget the acronym, but there's a college, university, something, bunch of letters, group where all the colleges are now supporting this program, at least conceptually. It's free. We like free. Braver Angels, by the way, is a member organization, and you can join for as little as like $1 or nothing, I think. And then I know $1 is true. I think a nothing is true, and you can give more if you choose to. But this is free on college campuses, and I would just encourage you.
Their students can join as well?
Oh,
Okay, great.
yeah, we'll take anybody. I mean, you probably have to be like of legal age to.
Not a minor.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, minors, we do stuff with high schools also, but in terms of membership, anybody can join. But I would encourage you to talk to a professor there. Maybe political science is where it's usually picked up. Somebody in liberal arts is much more likely to pick this up than a chemistry prof. Nothing against them. But just talk to one of them and have them check it out. And you can have those conversations about anything.
I'm going to hand the mic over there to Stephanie. I was actually going to make sure that you got in on this one.
Yeah, I just wanted to also say the other resource you have there in Chicago is the format that actually inspired our format here in Cleveland, which is called On the Table. It was created by the Chicago Community Trust. And they started their conversation platform by encouraging people to sit down and have a conversation over a meal. So I'd just say throw a potluck and have some friends come together, bring people together. If you feed them, they will come. That was the motto that we had at the first few years, just provide food and people will come, sit down, come up with a couple prompts and start the conversation that way. If you need those sort of facilitation guides, Braver Angels has some excellent ones. The Chicago Community Trust has an entire website full of resources for on-the-table conversations to help sort of steward. We have them at commongroundcle.org as well, but to sort of help guide you through the process of having a conversation that is meaningful and doesn't just turn into a screaming match.
Yeah. Really quick, Stephanie, is there like an example of any Common Ground events that were hosted on any of our college campuses that you really liked?
Oh my
that worked
gosh.
well?
Yes. So, oh my gosh, I gotta go back through. Yes. So, Tri-C has been a long-time partner. So they've had several common ground conversations on their multiple campuses. CSU had a conversation about workforce development several years back that brought together partnerships between a lot of different conversations. Lots and lots of different individual conversations. I'm trying to think of some that were done by students, but I think the most powerful common ground conversations are probably the ones I don't know about. I'm a lot more aware of the ones that are happening by big partners, bringing lots of people together. But I think the ones I've heard of that have had the most rippling effect have been small conversations put together by people like you, who brought a handful of friends, and each friend brought a friend, and you talked about let's do something with this community garden. And years later, that same community group is still stewarding that garden, and they've branched out to 5 other gardens for the 4 streets over. I think, going back to your question, lots of things you don't have. There are things that you can't find common ground on because they are moral issues or things that people feel very passionately about. I think what Emma said on the film at the end, she's like, they weren't really trying to change anybody's mind. They just wanted to find the things that brought them together and made them alike. By doing that, you recognize each other's humanity, and those things help people get to where they need to be in order to recognize those inalienable rights. I truly believe so.
Yeah, so getting to know each other as complicated individuals, right? Instead of fitting a monolith, you're more likely to be more welcome to listen, as well as comfortable in speaking what you feel true to yourself, right? And so when we talk about 1A rights and your student group nervous about, not even announcing their events because they're nervous about it. Right. So, but if you eat dinner with that person every night, it's a little bit different.
I just wanted to add that don't let the issues of the day be the issues that drive the conversation, right? Because this is all framed by the media, and all media, including public radio, God love them, are the same way. They are trying to attract an audience, right? And completely legitimate. But that's always nuancing into the extremes of the left and right media that are trying to bang the drum to get you pride and fear, right? That whole thing. The ones in the middle that are just the facts. Well, as I told my students in my class the other day, how many of you watch C-SPAN? Because you get a lot of facts there. No hands went up, and I don't watch it either.
I love
So anyway, so define it yourselves and find issues that, the hot button issues, you're right, you're not going to, don't start with those. I would love it if I saw someone actually start a conversation about our federal budget debt and deficit, because I'm of the generation where that was the center issue in the 70s and 80s, and it's just kind of gone away. And really, your generation is the generation we are handing this to. So you wanted some common ground, I'd start with that.
I think we have time for one more question before we wrap. Right here.
I would be interested to hear the committee's response on the way in which society or people in general decide to use their rights, and if that's changed over time. In other words, I use my rights for my own purposes, my own betterment, or I use my rights as a tool for leveraging the freedom and humanity of others. Have you seen that change? Is that a fear you have of people using their own rights more as a tool or weapon for their own purposes, or any thoughts at all about that?
All I will respond with is, and it turns out I'm older than you, or I was a child prodigy, one or the other.
Child prodigy.
Yeah. But over a lot of time, I have seen there are people who always want to reach out and influence others. There are people who will listen and observe others, and then there's people in their cocoons, no matter what kind of cocoon that may be, of any kind. I don't see, social media has changed the world for the better and the worse. If you can in any way black social media out of your head and just think about your neighborhood block party, and when the conversations aren't political, what are those conversations like? And is somebody trying to persuade you? Or is somebody trying to use their rights to get you to do something else for somebody else's rights or whatever? That's where you could get a much better answer to the question, because I've got a very quantitative background, and the whole thing about polling and statistics is it's got to be unbiased. You've got to design things in a way that you get actual data, and there is no unbiased social media platform anywhere in the world to get any data on any question, including the one you just asked.
That algorithm knows you.
It's
Definitely.
math. An algorithm is a math. Is
Yeah,
all they are.
it'll-
So you're going to answer your question. I'm going to say you're going to have to kind of find that answer yourself, and because your data pool would be different from Tom's data pool or different from Rod's data pool, you might get different answers, and that's where statistically you just can't broaden those and say the world is this way.
I think you want to get in there?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, I guess I was just going to say, I think to build on that we're living in these little bubbles, right, in our little echo chambers of our own opinions. That's what the internet and all of these things have done. So if you have to break out of that, you have to make a conscious effort to sit down across from a stranger and who you haven't had any chance to vet either with technology or some other way, right? And by doing that, you're opening yourself up to different perspectives, and that's the only way people can grow. And we've managed to shut that down. So by creating more opportunities in our civic life, in our cultural life, in our individual neighborhoods, then you present these opportunities to sort of grow your perspective by meeting others, and then that's what I think is the answer to that question.
I would just add that all of us have some kind of position of power. You're sitting here today, right? So at BW, I've been there a long time. I'm an older white guy. I am now called privileged, right? Now I could get really pissed off at that and say, well, no, I had this in my story, et cetera. Or I could use that, as I've been trying to do, to help create an Africana Studies minor, and actually taught the intro course and had to explain why a guy like me is teaching this course. And I said, it's very simple. We need to continue to diversify our faculty until we get somebody who really has lived that experience, and I'm going to hand that course off. And 3 years ago, I did just that. That was really painful because that was my favorite course to teach in 22 years. But it was something that I could do to move that ball forward. And all of us have those, and don't ever think in terms of results. Think in terms of the action. Just like Bobby Kennedy said, it's about the ripple, not the stone. I'm sorry, it's about the stone, not the ripple. Yeah. You're the stone, you drop it, you don't know where that ripple's going. I worked in social services for 5 years with juvenile offenders, had 150 students over 5 years in a carpentry training program. You know how many carpenters we created? 1. But we dropped the recidivism rate in half. But I did the work because I loved it, not because of the results. And that's one of the biggest things, particularly when you're in any of these areas. You get really focused on results, and you can get really frustrated really fast. So wherever that is, just do it.
Yeah, I had kind of a quick thought. This is my international relations and life experience perspective on this, but remember that you're not just America is not the entire world. And the issues that exist in the States and that are real and deep and important, are that, but they're not everything. And in so many ways, I have realized personally how much of a privilege I have having an American passport, because I went to a Lebanese school where all my peers, I was the only American in the grade. All my peers are Lebanese, and now Lebanon is falling apart as a country. It is a complete disaster. Inflation is crazy. People are begging to leave, and some can't leave. Really bright students scored much higher grades, just can't find a way out because their passport just. Actually, I just got a text this morning from a friend who said, "Yes, I finally got my passport appointment. It's in 2024." So realize that just the mobility that you guys have, and honestly, America isn't everything, but the way that America goes, so goes the world in many parts of the world. And what happens here influences the conversation elsewhere. So there's a responsibility that a lot of us just don't think about very much. And that's why, preserving and upholding and, shaking democracy here and making sure it's healthy is a really crucial thing.
One of my favorite things that I've read recently is about accountability, and saying that accountability can be done in love and out of love, not just destruction. And I thought that was a really powerful statement that made me rethink the word accountability.
I
So
think that's the only one that lasts.
yeah, exactly. I do want to, I know we are at time, so I want to thank everyone, especially our filmmaker here and our panelists for joining us on a Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much. Thank you. And if you have any other questions, I'm sure they'd be happy to chat with you after. Thank you so much.